I'm gonna show you some magic frequencies for your entire mix. These are areas where you can make small adjustments with EQ that can either help clean up muddiness or increase fullness, maybe reduce some harshness or add some clarity and brightness, even make the entire mix sound more upfront. By the way, if you like these magic frequency videos, make sure you download my mixing cheat sheet so you have all of the go-to frequencies for every track in your mix available at your fingertips for quick reference. I'll send it to you for free. It's over at mixcheatsheet.com or click the link in the description below. In the process of mixing a song, we're constantly making decisions about whether a track needs more of something or less of something in terms of the frequency balance. So let's start by looking at the more part, just because I think it's more fun. So I've got 5 different frequency areas that you might need to look at boosting in your mix. And the first one is for adding thump, which is anything below 80 hertz. So let's check that out now. Sit back, enjoy the ride, we're on our way. By the way, I think I might be one of the only people left using this EQ. Sit back, enjoy the ride, we're on our way. One track, no turning back, forget yesterday. So here's a big boost at 80. Sit back, enjoy the ride, we're on our way. One track, no. And if we sweep it down, sit back, enjoy the ride, we're on. These are the frequencies that you'd get from a subwoofer, right? This is the thump in the chest that you feel from a kick drum. This is that really low rumble that you actually feel from a bass guitar. And the higher up, around the 80 hertz area, it still sounds fairly tight and defined, right? But then as you sweep it down, the lower you get, the less tight and defined it's gonna sound, but it's gonna sound deeper and more rumbly, and you'll probably feel it more. Sit back, enjoy the ride, we're on our way. One track, no turn. So if you need to feel more of that thump and rumble in your mix, that's where to look. All right, moving up, the next area you might wanna look at boosting is for thickness. And this is between 150 and about 400 hertz. So let's go right about in the middle. Now, if I'm boosting in this area, it's usually with a broad Q, not something really tight, because you're gonna have some weird frequencies poking out. So you wanna go for a really broad boost. So this boost sounds pretty good in this mix. And the low mids, this is an area that's hard to get right because there's a bit of a fine line between having too much, where it's really muddy and woofy sounding, or you can have too little and your mix sounds very thin and has no power, outside of the studio. So for me, if the rest of the mix is pretty well balanced, but it just doesn't have that beef, that size to it, a little touch here can really go a long way to adding that thickness and fullness. Okay, the next frequency is what I call the upfront frequency. This works especially well on guitars, on vocals, any lead synths or lead guitars, anything that you want to just come right up front in the mix, or even in this case, for an entire mix to have a more in-your-face feel. And it's boosting at 1K. Let's check that out. Everybody goes in blind, to dwell in shadows, hunted in the night, taken to the gallows. So you can hear how the guitars and the vocals especially just come right up front. I find that beginners or newer mixers tend to neglect this 1K area. They don't put enough of it in their mix. I think just because boosting more extreme highs and lows sounds more shiny, at least initially, but you need to have a decent amount of this 1K area in a modern rock or pop mix to have it sound energetic and have that translate everywhere. Okay, let's keep moving up. Let's talk about brightness. And there are two areas, two types of brightness that I think about in the mix. The first one is what I would say is an aggressive or edgy brightness. And the second is for more of an airy brightness. So for the aggressive brightness, you're looking at around 5K. So you get that brightness, you get that overall lift, but it has more of an edge to it. Sometimes you'd even do a shelf, actually more often. Okay, now let's contrast that with the airy brightness, which is at about 12K. So it still gives the mix an overall lift, a bit of a sheen on top, but you don't get that kind of definition from a vocal or drums or guitars that you pull out when you boost about 5K and up. So I've given you some examples here, but when would you actually use these moves in a mix? Well, for me, it would look like I'm getting into a mix, I'm maybe halfway through, and then I'll start referencing against reference tracks that I like. And one of these areas might stand out to me. Let's say maybe I think the reference mixes just have more of that 1K upfront feel. So what I might do is throw an EQ on the mix bus and do a little boost around 1K, and things are gonna start jumping out. Maybe the whole thing sounds better, but maybe it's just the guitars that pop out really nicely with that boost, or the vocals, or maybe even the drums. And at that point, I probably wouldn't leave that boost on the mix bus. I'd get rid of that, and then I'd go down to the individual guitar or drum or vocal tracks, whatever it is that I noticed, and I'll make the move there. I like to build the mix bottom up, not making all these crazy moves at the very end. But sometimes, it's not very often, but sometimes I'll be at the very, very end of the mix, and I'll realize that, maybe my mix is just a little bit too thin. It just sounds a little bit fuller overall. I might add a half a dB at 400 hertz with a really broad boost, like you saw, and that is just what it needed, and I will leave that there on the entire mix. All right, so we've talked about where you might commonly need to boost in your mix. Now let's go to the flip side. Let's talk about where you might often need to cut. Working our way up from the low end again, starting with the muddy area, which is around 100 to about 400 hertz. So this is basically the exact opposite of that thickness boost that we talked about before. So if you've got too much of that, you're gonna need to cut, often with a narrower Q. So this mix has a lot of it. So just sweep it around between those frequencies, try to find the area where it sounds most muddy. I was found here. You come around here. I was found here. And we clean up those drums a bit. So this is another example where if I was doing this on a full mix, I actually kind of like that beefiness in the guitars and bass, but I noticed that it cleans up the drums a lot. So I would go back and actually make this cut on the drum bus if I could, and probably leave the rest of it as is. Now be careful with this area. It's tempting to cut in these low mids a lot because it gives the instant effect of sounding cleaner and brighter and clearer. But if you cut too much of this, you'll lose all the power and meat in your mix. So use with caution. Now this next area that you might need to cut, it's kind of hard to describe, but I settled on calling it the basement sound. And it's about 600 to 900 hertz. I'll show you what it sounds like. And the reason I call it this is because, I don't know, just anytime I've mixed tracks that were recorded in a really small, untreated or badly treated room, or an untreated basement or something, they always seem to have a buildup of this 600, 700, 800 hertz frequency range. And it's usually drums that you'll notice that, or any other tracks where there's a big room influence. Listen again. You can hear it in those drums especially. It's that honky, nasally, kind of boxy sound that you hear often in small rooms, and to me, it just sounds cheap and amateur. And the last magic frequency you might need to cut in your mix is for harshness, which lives around 3 to 4K, maybe 4.5K. Let's listen to that.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way. One track, no turning back. Forget yesterday.
Pretty common for people to have a little bit too much of this in the mix, especially on distorted guitars, is where you hear it. Sometimes on vocals if you've gotten carried away there, or maybe a lead instrument, or even acoustic instruments or strings sometimes.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way. One track, no turning back. Forget yesterday. Unknown destination.
Can work surprisingly well across an entire mix, just a little bit of a dip around that 3.5 to 4.5K area. So those are the 3 magic areas you might need to look at cutting. Let's keep going on this song though. Let's use all of these different areas that I've talked about throughout this video, and I'll try to give this track what it needs.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way. One track, no.
All right, so I like that cut there, helping with the harshness. I think this mix needs to sound bigger, needs to sound thicker. So remember, that's around 150 to 400. Let's check that out.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way. One track, no turning back. Forget yesterday. Unknown destination.
Could use a lot of that. Now let's also see if we can get some more 1K just to make it feel a little more energetic.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way. One track, no turning back. Forget yesterday. Unknown destination. Aiming for the sky. So high, so high.
Not sure it needs anything else down low or up high. I mean, let's try.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way.
We can put a tiny bit there. I don't think it needs that much more thump though. And in terms of brightness, I think it's there already.
Sit back, enjoy the ride. We're on our way. One track, no turn. When you fight against the time and you're about to lose your mind, it's easy to cross the line.
Yeah, I wouldn't make this any brighter. Okay, let's A/B this.
When you fight against the time and you're about to lose your mind, it's easy to cross the line. There's no answer.
So that's why I called them magic frequencies. I'd say that's a pretty huge improvement without really any big major moves. So those are some key areas for you to pay attention to when you're mixing, even if you're mastering. And I've got a whole series of these magic frequency videos going. So if you want to dive deeper into how to EQ specific tracks like kick drum, snare, bass, vocals, etc., then click here to check out that playlist. Make sure you download the free mixing cheat sheet if you haven't already. It's at the link below. That's it for today. See you in the next video.